Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight to welcome you back to the Shangri-La Hotel Ballroom for the opening of our proceedings this Sunday, the 31st of May, 2015. May I take first this opportunity warmly to thank President Tony Tam and the Astana for the marvelous reception and dinner they offered the delegates to the 2015 Shangri-La Dialogue last night. As I said in my brief welcome remarks, it is always a pleasure to meet the President of the Republic of Singapore in the Astana, because it was with him in 2002 that the Shangri-La Dialogue was established, when he then had the responsibilities of Minister of Defense. We've worked since then very professionally and warmly with all agencies of the government of Singapore to establish this dialogue as the premier defense forum in the Asia Pacific. This morning we have two plenary sessions. Let me remind you again, the plenary sessions are on the record. That applies as much to the comments and questions from the floor as it does from the prepared statements from the ministers and senior officials addressing us. We will proceed as we did yesterday with initial statements from the panel, and then open it up for that strategic dialogue and exchange with the delegates gathered here. The fourth plenary session is entitled Strengthening Regional Order in the Asia-Pacific Towards More Active Conflict Resolution and Cooperation. And we're delighted to have with us here this morning Admiral Sun Jianguo, Deputy Chief of Staff, General Staff Department of the People's Liberation Army of China, Gerry Brownlee, the Minister of Defense of New Zealand, and Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, the Federal Minister of Defense of Germany. Could I now invite Admiral Sun Jianguo to address this 14th Shangri-La Dialogue? Admiral, the podium is yours.
Distinguished Dr. Chipman, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I wish to pay high tribute to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who made extraordinary contribution to peace and development in Asia. I would like to thank our hosts for inviting my colleagues and me to this dialogue. Let me take this opportunity to illustrate China's policies, concepts, practice, and proposals on safeguarding peace and security. And then I will answer your questions. I will talk about three issues. First, China adheres to the path of peaceful development and is committed to promoting regional and international prosperity and stability. We have but one planet, and countries share one world. Committed to peaceful development, China upholds a national defense policy that is defensive in nature. A more developed and stronger China will bring important opportunities, common prosperity, and positive energy to countries around the world. China advocates the building of a community of common destiny, providing its strategy for peace and development of mankind. Our world today is witnessing in-depth development in multipolarization and economic globalization, and constant progress is being made in IT application and cultural diversity. It has become a salient feature of human progress that countries are increasingly interdependent, and they fall and rise together. As early as in 2012, based on his profound insights into the future of human destiny, Chinese President Xi Jinping put forward the idea of building a community of common destiny for all mankind. At the Boao Forum for Asia annual conference last March, President Xi further advocated that countries need to respect each other and treat each other as equals, seek win-win cooperation and common development, pursue common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, and uphold inclusiveness and mutual learning between civilizations. This grand vision transcends national and ideological boundaries. It is a new vision that will lead the world to enduring peace and common prosperity, and represents China's wisdom to work with the rest of the world to build a better home for mankind. China is committed to promoting win-win cooperation and a new model of international relations that meets the security and development needs of all countries. Confrontation must be replaced with cooperation and zero-sum game with mutual benefits if the purposes and principles of the UN Charter are to be carried forward. And this is also the only way to achieve peaceful development. To keep up with the times, we cannot live in the 21st century with outdated thinking from the age of colonial expansion or the zero-sum mentality of the Cold War. Cooperation for win-win outcomes should be adopted as the fundamental goal in interactions between countries. And it is necessary to seek common ground while shelving differences, increase common interests, and diffuse disputes, and pursue peace, development, and security through cooperation. While seeking security and development for themselves, countries need to accommodate the security of others and work for common development of all. China advocates common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security and the building of a security road that is shared by and win-win to all. In today's world, security means much more than before, and its implications go well beyond a single region or time frame. No country can have the security of its own while leaving the rest insecure. Nor can one seek absolute security of itself at the expense of the security of others. Countries should resolve disputes and differences through peaceful dialogue and negotiation, and accommodate the security concerns of others while safeguarding their own. It is important to take into consideration both history and the reality, and tackle traditional and non-traditional security issues in a coordinated way. It is important to emphasize both development and security, encourage partnership instead of alliance, and establish more inclusive and constructive partnership without setting imaginary enemies or targeting any third party, so as to promote sustainable security through sustainable development. China is a firm believer in the approach of upholding justice while pursuing shared interests and values faith, friendship, justice, and principles in international affairs. Committed to upholding justice while pursuing common interests, China has provided assistance to other countries to the best of its ability and shall always be a reliable friend and sincere partner of other developing countries. China strives to play a constructive role in international affairs with an objective and impartial position, and will never depend on or subjugate itself to any external forces. Believing in openness and inclusiveness, China respects the social systems and development paths chosen by the people for their own countries and stands for tolerance and mutual learning among civilizations, with a view to jointly contributing to human progress. Now, I want to talk on the second point. China actively fulfills its international responsibilities and obligations and plays a constructive role in safeguarding regional and international security and stability. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council and a responsible major country, China has actively engaged in international security cooperation and played a unique role in the effort to create a peaceful, stable, prosperous neighborhood and provided public services to address global problems and challenges. First, fulfill international obligations as a major country and actively participate in the missions under the UN framework. Since 1990, the Chinese military has sent over 30,000 officers and soldiers to participate in 24 UN peacekeeping missions. This year, for the first time, China sent 20 blocks of 59 convoys to the Gulf of Aden and the waters off the Somalia coast. Since 2008, protection to nearly 6,000 ships, of which half are from foreign countries, answering to the call of the UNSC and OPCW, Chinese naval ships accomplished the task to escort the ships delivering serious chemical weapons for destruction in 2014. Second, promote humanitarian spirit and actively participate in disaster relief and emergency response efforts. China shares the pain and difficulties of the affected countries and stands ready to provide personnel, financial, and material assistance to the best of its ability. In responding to the typhoon disaster in the Philippines, in searching for the missing passenger plane of Malaysian Airlines, in fighting the Ebola epidemic, and in delivering emergency water supplies to Maldives, the Chinese military has provided swift humanitarian assistance. Not long ago, during its operation to evacuate Chinese citizens from Yemen, the Chinese Navy helped evacuate 279 people from 15 countries, including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Germany, Japan, and Singapore. When a magnitude 8.1 earthquake hit Nepal, the Chinese military not only provided emergency disaster relief supplies, but also sent rescue and medical teams. The PLA naval hospital ship, the Peace Ark, carried out overseas medical services and participated in medical relief operations in 18 countries, providing treatment and medicines to the people in need. Third, address common security challenges and deepen practical security cooperation. China has actively enhanced bilateral and multilateral defense and security cooperation in a bid to work with the rest of the world to meet security threats and challenges. Up to now, the Chinese military has conducted over 100 joint military exercises and training activities with more than 50 countries. In April this year, the Chinese and U.S. naval ships held the CUES exercise in the South China Sea. In the middle of this month, the Chinese and the Russian navies carried out a joint exercise in the Mediterranean Sea aimed at safeguarding open sea shipping. A few days ago, China sent personnel to take part in the 4th ARF disaster relief exercise in Malaysia. Over the years, China helped train tens of thousands of military personnel of various kinds for more than 130 countries. China has also taken an active part in the international humanitarian mine clearance assistance by training technical personnel from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Sudan, donating mine clearance equipment, and providing assistance to relevant countries. Fourth, enhance mutual trust and understanding, and strengthen defense and security dialogue. China is actively advancing the steady development of the new model of military-to-military relationship with the United States, enriching the security connotation of China-Russia comprehensive strategic and cooperative partnership, building up a closer China-ASEAN community of common destiny, taking the initiative to launch China-ASEAN defense ministers' informal meetings, establishing defense and security consultation mechanisms with 27 countries, and actively participating in multilateral defense exchanges within the frameworks such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN Regional Forum, and ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus. Fifth, safeguard regional peace and stability and properly handle disputes over territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. China commits to forge friendship and partnership with its neighbors and foster amity, sincerity, mutual benefit, and inclusiveness in its neighborhood. So far, China has completed the delimitation of land borders with 12 of its 14 neighbors and established the maritime boundary with Vietnam in the Beibu Gulf. China has signed treaties of good neighborliness, friendship, and cooperation with 8 of its neighbors and started the negotiation to conclude a similar treaty with ASEAN. When dealing with maritime disputes with relevant neighboring countries, China has always kept in mind the larger interest of maritime security. In spite of the sufficient historical and legal evidence and its indisputable claims of rights and interests, China has exercised enormous restraint, making positive contributions to peace and stability of the region and the world at large. At present, the situation in the South China Sea is, on the whole, peaceful and stable, and there has never been an issue with the freedom of navigation. China has carried out construction on some islands and reefs in the South China Sea, mainly for the purpose of improving the functions of the relevant islands and reefs and the working and living conditions of personnel stationed there. apart from meeting the necessary defense needs, it is more geared to better perform China's international responsibilities and obligations regarding maritime search and rescue, disaster prevention and relief, maritime scientific research, meteorological observation, environmental protection, safety of navigation, fishery production services. China has built an oceanic survey station of the UN on the Yongshujiao Reef and started the construction of two multifunction lighthouses on the Huayangjiao Reef and the Chiguajiao Reef. These constructions are for the purpose of providing international public services. As a major country, the scale and pace of its construction is in line with the international responsibilities and obligations China assumes in the South China Sea. I want to reaffirm that these constructions fall well within the scope of China's sovereignty and are justified, legitimate, and reasonable. They do not target any other countries or affect the freedom of navigation. There are no changes in China's claims in the South China Sea, no changes in China's position on peaceful resolution of the relevant disputes through negotiation consultation, no changes in China's will to safeguard the freedom and safety of navigation in the South China Sea, and no changes in China's goal to uphold regional peace and stability. We hope relevant countries will work together in the same direction to build the South China Sea into a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation. I wish to explain that it only took China several decades to accomplish the progress developed countries made in several hundred years, which China undoubtedly can be proud of. And China has become the world's second largest economy since 2010. However, with a total population of over 1.3 billion, China's per capita GDP ranks around the 90th place in the world. And China is still the largest developing country in the world. China's water, oil, and gas resources in per capita terms are only about 25%, 20%, and 5%, respectively, of the world average, and its per capita farmland is less than half of the world average. Each year, another 10 million workers need to find jobs in cities, and there are over 8.5 million people with disabilities in China. According to World Bank standards, there are still over 200 million people living under the poverty line in China. What's more, China is under huge pressure when it comes to treatment of environmental pollution and ecological protection. These difficulties that China faces in its development are beyond the imagination of other countries. In spite of such circumstances, China has actively fulfilled various international obligations and done its utmost to help countries and peoples in need. And this demonstrates the earnest effort of the Chinese government and people to translate the vision for a community of shared destiny into reality. The last point: vigorously enhance defense and security cooperation and make greater contribution to common security of the region and the world. Peaceful development needs the joint efforts of all countries. Defense departments and militaries of various countries should strengthen defense and security cooperation and jointly safeguard regional and world security and stability. Here, I would like to share with you the following ideas and proposals in this profession. To promote peace and development, it is necessary for all countries to make joint efforts, pursue enduring peace. History and reality have told us that wars, like devil and nightmare, bring disaster and deep sufferings to mankind and must be resolutely prevented. Peace, like air and sunshine, is hardly noticed when people are benefiting from it, but no one can survive without it, and utmost care must be given to look after it. The Chinese military will unswervingly defend the core national interests, unswervingly promote defense and security cooperation, unswervingly shoulder international responsibilities, and fulfill international obligations. We are ready to work with defense departments and militaries of all countries, stay committed to taking history as a mirror, and make joint efforts to safeguard the post-war international order with the UN as the core and based on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, jointly safeguard world peace so that people of all countries can share peace and happiness. Uphold mutual trust and inclusiveness. Only when countries treat each other with mutual trust, honoring of commitment, mutual understanding, and inclusiveness, can they find more common ground, resolve differences, and work together for the common interests. We should take mutual respect as the prerequisite. All countries, big or small, rich or poor, strong or weak, are equal members of the international community and enjoy equal rights to participate in international affairs. The affairs of a country should be run by that country independently. We should uphold fairness and objectiveness and make assessment of things taking place on the international stage on the basis of their merits or demerits, rather than following double standards and making irresponsible remarks based on one's own subjective preferences, or tilting one against another. We should value inclusiveness as a principle. Since countries have different histories, cultures, and traditions, the defense departments in various countries should have more understanding and trust and less suspicion or misgivings, so as to really turn mutual trust into a bridge and bond for realizing common security and building a community of common destiny for mankind. Adhere to the effective approach of dialogue and consultation. It is not so terrible to have differences. What's important is that we should find the measures and ways to resolve differences. The defense departments and the militaries of all countries should focus on common security challenges, push for the construction of a security framework featuring inclusiveness, equality, and openness. And they should prevent confrontation or conflict. They should strengthen cooperation and through the expansion of cooperation expand common interests and to build security architecture and continue to build and use well the SCO, the ARF, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, and other mechanisms to provide guarantee for enduring peace in the region. At present, China and ASEAN countries are exploring the establishment of crisis management measures such as bilateral defense telephone links. China and Japan are restarting the consultation over maritime and air liaison mechanism. China and the U.S. are working to improve the rules of behavior for safety of air and maritime encounters. meet the inherent demand for sharing of responsibilities. All countries, big or small, have the equal rights to participate in regional security affairs and they share the responsibilities to maintain world peace and regional stability. Big countries should take on responsibilities for big countries and should not bully small countries. Small countries need to meet responsibilities for a small country, provoke no incident, and refrain from hijacking regional security for selfish gains. Developed countries possess and control a larger part of global resources and should shoulder more responsibilities in the joint endeavor to meet global challenges and major security threats. Developing countries should strive to overcome difficulties and take progressive steps to gradually improve security environment and play a role corresponding to its strength in promoting international security. Uphold the core concept of win-win cooperation. In the new historical era, force cannot build peace, and power cannot guarantee security. Only through win-win cooperation can we do big and good things which can last in the long run. China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, is in the process of establishing the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and all of these will bring tangible benefits to countries in the region. In October this year, China will host the China-ASEAN Defense Ministers' Special Meeting and the 6th Shangshan Forum. We will continue to discuss with other countries the way ahead for defense and security cooperation. We hope all countries in the world will, in the spirit of win-win and all-win cooperation, strengthen communication and cooperation, and make concerted efforts to safeguard peace and stability. Thank you for your attention.
Admiral Sun Jianguo, thank you very much for that very positive message to the Shangri-La Dialogue 2015, for reminding the delegates here of the activities of the Chinese military and numerous humanitarian and disaster relief activities, for also describing the range of work that the Chinese military does in various countries around the world. I might take the opportunity of mentioning that on Friday, the IISS released a new Adelphi book called China's Strong Arm that details some of the activities the Chinese military have had to engage in to protect Chinese citizens living abroad, given the wide investment activities of China and the way in which Chinese labor has now to operate in some very difficult areas. And so that work of the Chinese military is also something interesting to explore. And thank you finally also for underscoring what was stated in the last paragraph of your newly released Chinese defense white paper, that China intends to do everything it can to provide service for the international public good of common security. Thank you very much for all those positive messages to this dialogue. The Prime Minister of Singapore on Friday indicated that small nations had to find a way to operate in this complex Asia-Pacific regional order, and the security interests of small nations could not be forgotten in the debate of how the big powers relate. New Zealand is one of those small nations, has a very special relationship with much smaller nations, and I think it's very important that we have the Minister of Defense of New Zealand to give a perspective of the smaller nations on Asia-Pacific security. Thank you, Minister.
Good morning, Dr. van der Leyen, Admiral Sun Jianguo, and ladies and gentlemen. Can I begin by acknowledging the passing of Lee Kuan Yew, not only a great leader for Singapore, but a great citizen and statesman of the world. Can I thank the Singaporean government alongside the ISS for putting on this dialogue. This is my first attendance at the Shangri-La dialogue, and it's very clear to me that it is an important occasion for issues that are significant to our region and to the wider world that we are part of for discussion. And as a small, geographically distant, trade-dependent island nation, New Zealand's fortunes have become increasingly linked to stability and economic integration in Asia. We're reliant on seaborne trade and the security and freedom of navigation for our economic prosperity and well-being. Over half of New Zealand's maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. For the last decade, New Zealand has prospered, benefiting from Asia's remarkable economic growth and integration. The successful conclusion of regional free trade agreements will only add to the momentum, and we also benefit from Southeast Asia's considerable political and security integration. This year, New Zealand celebrates the 40th anniversary as a dialogue partner with status in ASEAN. The collective opportunity for wealth and prosperity of people in our region are too great to allow disputes to get out of hand. But at the same time, economic interdependence on its own will not prevent a drift towards strategic competition. Economic interdependence must be matched with equal measure to build an open and inclusive regional order, where security, freedom of navigation, open trade routes and access to territorial seas and resources that are managed in accordance with international laws and norms. While New Zealand does not wish to take a position that might cause conflict and disputes, we are concerned about the prospect of miscalculation and escalation leading to conflict. I've listened to other speakers over this weekend, what they've had to say, particularly on the South China Sea. Like other countries, New Zealand would be pleased to better understand the intentions of countries undertaking reclamation activities in those seas. And I thank the Admiral for his comments this morning. In my view, all big countries are made much bigger in every sense of the word by recognising their strength and confidently sharing and diffusing concerns of smaller countries. By recognising these concerns and seeking dialogue in the settlement of issues, it is the mark of a big country. And as we would say in our New Zealand, confers what we call mana or respect of nations. New Zealand is strongly invested in how issues that may arise from this activity then may be managed and resolved. Might I say here that New Zealand has strong relationships with China. We have a political and economic relationship based on four firsts. We were the first Western country to conclude a bilateral agreement with China on its accession to the World Trade Organization, the first developed country to recognise China's status as a market economy, the first developed country to enter into free trade agreement negotiations, and the first to sign a high-quality, comprehensive, balanced free trade agreement with China. We are also part of the Asian Development Bank. So I acknowledge the many points of similarity in the comments this morning made by Admiral Sun, and note the commonality between his comments and many previous speakers and even those of my own. We all have an interest in regional stability as it directly impacts on the security and prosperity of the people in every country represented in this room. In the security space, New Zealand is working across four main pillars of activity to promote conflict prevention and resolution. The first pillar is increasing our integration with multilateral institutions and support of dialogue and prevention diplomacy. This is what motivated New Zealand to seek our current non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. The starting point for this pillar in this region is our participation in ASEAN's security architecture. We strongly support ASEAN's centrality and value the opportunities for dialogue provided by partnership status. The fact that there has not been a significant interstate conflict in the region since ASEAN's inception is a testament to its capacity for conflict prevention. We don't need to add to the meetings and structures we already have, rather find ways to improve them so they are capable of responding to new challenges. I welcome the comments by Secretary Carter and others about the need to support initiatives that will enhance transparency and build trust within the security architecture. Transparency is critical for managing military modernisation, which is occurring rapidly across the Asia-Pacific. There's a range of ways to interpret this trend. It's only natural that as nations become richer and more internally stable, they will seek to shape the environment around them and develop their capabilities accordingly. On the other hand, rapid military modernisation in an environment of mistrust is a worrying prospect. It's an irony that the economic growth that allows for increased military spending would be at risk if the Asia-Pacific becomes a destabilised environment. Fortunately, ASEAN-centric dialogues provide ample opportunities for nations to share their perspectives of how they view the region's changing security landscape and how they are modernising their militaries in response. For New Zealand, the US is a very close friend, and our mutual ties are very strong. We've welcomed the US's increased presence in the region and look forward to participating in the broad range of US-led multilateral exercises that promise to bind the region together. The Japan-US alliance has been and remains a positive factor in the stability of East Asia, and we welcome the continuing strength of that alliance. New Zealand values the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, as an important venue for preventative diplomacy. We also place a great value on our membership of the Association of Southeast Asian Defence Ministers Meeting Plus. These institutions provide us with forums where we can support confidence-building measures which form the second pillar of activity, conflict prevention and resolution. In particular, New Zealand supports efforts to develop consensus-based codes of conduct at sea and in the air to prevent the accidents and miscalculations that can so easily lead to wider conflict. We also encourage the full and effective implementation of the ASEAN-China Declaration of Conduct for the South China Sea. Alongside these measures, we encourage efforts to establish clear hotlines between capitals to support more effective crisis management. I noticed the Admiral making the same comment. At the same time, it's important that these confidence-building measures and codes of conduct are trusted by those who sign up to them. This underscores the importance of consensus and invites complementary efforts to build trust and familiarity in the region. That brings me to the third pillar, which is to cooperate to deliver practical security benefits to the region and build that familiarity between our militaries. The Asia-Pacific is host to a range of security challenges that affect all of us and motivate our militaries to work closely together. The threat posed by transnational terrorism, returning foreign fighters, and the spread of violent, intolerant, radical religious ideas cuts across borders and reaches into our Asia-Pacific area. Throughout Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific, trade depends on freedom of navigation through a handful of sea lanes and ease of communication. It's vital that these trade routes remain free from piracy and do not become conduits for transnational crime and people smuggling. The aim of delivering practical security benefits for our part of the world should be to respond to security challenges faced by every nation in the region and to get governments and militaries comfortable working alongside each other, helping to build familiarity and trust. We're committed to supporting the stability of our immediate neighbourhood, the South Pacific. In the last 2 decades, we've deployed forces to Bougainville, Timor-Leste and the Solomon Islands to help uphold stability. Prime Minister Lee talked in his most excellent speech on Friday evening about addressing past grievances between nations and suggesting reconciliation as the only way to ensure the freedoms and prosperity of all our people. The conflicts I've just mentioned, now resolved, are good examples in our region of how that approach can be successful. The New Zealand Defence Force has contributed humanitarian aid in Asia. When Super Typhoon Yolanda devastated the Philippines, we were able to send a C-130 Hercules to deliver relief supplies along with so many others. New Zealand also provided surveillance aircraft to support the multinational response following the tragic disappearance of Malaysian Airlines MH370. And in response to threats of transnational terrorism, New Zealand has deployed 143 personnel to Iraq on a combined mission with Australia to help build capacity of the Iraqi security forces. We know that New Zealand is not removed from the reach of terrorism, so we support the efforts in this region to counter the radicalisation and the influence of Daesh. We're working with partners in the region to address these non-traditional security threats. We are helping to organise a major maritime security and counter-terrorism exercise in 2016 under the auspices of the Asian Defence Ministers Meeting Plus. The final pillar that will support active conflict resolution and prevention is increasing people-to-people links at all levels across the region. Our defence relations with Southeast Asian partners are anchored in the 5 power defence arrangements, and we have a long history of defence cooperation with Malaysia and Singapore. We are also pleased to be growing our defence relationships with new partners like Vietnam and Myanmar, and extending existing partnerships with Indonesia and indeed China. New Zealand strongly encourages links between junior officials and defence personnel who are future leaders in the region. That's why we are hosting the inaugural activity in the ASEAN Defence Minister Meeting Plus Future Leaders Program in Auckland later this year. This program seeks to encourage mid-ranking officers from civilian and military organisations across the region and prepares them to work together to address future security challenges. However, all these pillars, multilateral integration, confidence-building measures, military cooperation and people-to-people links, rest on deep and solid foundations of respect for the rule of law and international norms. New Zealand's approach to security, and particularly maritime security, is anchored in strong support for international laws of the sea. The pillars I've just outlined support an integrated and prosperous region where conflict and disputes are actively presented and resolved. Each pillar is mutually reinforcing, and all 4 are supported by cross-cutting behaviours that bind the region together. So finally, efforts to further strengthen regional defence and security cooperation will require we all work to build upon trust in our region, underpinned by transparency, consensus and mutual respect. Thank you.
Gerry Brownlee, thank you very much for that very straightforward, very no-nonsense speech from New Zealand. Many thanks for the specific recommendations on military-to-military cooperation. And I think for reminding us also, given your own experiences of Bougainville and Solomon Islands, that the techniques of conflict resolution in some parts of the Asia-Pacific are very much alive and well. So that's a really important message that you've delivered to the Shangri-La dialogue. We thank you very warmly for it. Germany is Europe's great economic power. It has an impressive set of trading relationships with the Asia-Pacific. Interdependence is a major feature of Europe's relationship with the Asia-Pacific, and so it's a real delight to invite to her first Shangri-La dialogue Ursula von der Leyen to address the delegates here. Thank you very much for being with us. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, John, Admiral Sun, Gerry Brownlee, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank our hosts for inviting me to this very important conference, a conference at which the security of half of the global population is discussed. And this is a very special year for the Singapore-German relation, because in this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Singapore and Germany. These relations are flourishing, especially in the field of security. I'm visiting real friends and an important partner here in Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, I came here to listen and to learn, as I did in India this week when I had the opportunity to meet Prime Minister Modi. As I did in the last 2 days, I talked to some of my colleagues from the Asian Pacific, and I listened to these very interesting panels. Let me draw on one conclusion as a European. Even though the security challenges in Europe and Asia are not the same, the patterns are very similar. We see transnational terrorism, we see failing states, a trend towards military power projection, increasing territorial conflicts, and more could be added to that list. How we address these challenges will certainly follow different lines of reasoning in Europe and Asia, respectively. After all, we all have our own established cultural traditions. Therefore, I want to share with you our lessons learned. Specifically, as a German Minister of Defense, I want to tell you that we have not forgotten our history. This year, we commemorate the 70th anniversary of end of World War II. We have not forgotten that it was us, the Germans, who caused death and disaster in World War II. But we have also not forgotten that at the end of the war, it were our former enemies, especially our American friends and allies, who stretched out their hands to take us back into the circle of democratic countries. It was extremely wise of the United States and the Allies not to weaken and suppress the defeated Germany, but to invest and help Germany, and thus Western Europe, to rise and prosper. As Ashton Carter said yesterday, everybody rises and everybody wins since 70 years, end of quote. And Europe is the living proof of this. There's a second lesson learned. The Marshall Plan was an enormous help, but it was just the beginning. We worked hard on expanding our SMEs, and they flourished because German ships could navigate all over the world, delivering goods to New York, Shanghai, St. Petersburg, just to name some. And German companies could invest everywhere. The trading companies made friends all over the world. This did not happen by chance. The free trade was possible because every nation respected the freedom of the sea. And this is what this conference is all about. Stability, security, and prosperity are indivisible. None of them can exist without the others. Ladies and gentlemen, the success is never for granted. There were many setbacks, crises, and conflicts to overcome. The bumpy road to prosperity and security taught us that we need an overarching security architecture. And therefore, we invested over and over again in partnerships and alliances. Germany grew by investing in the European Union. It was not easy. We had to invest by building the common market, by opening our national borders, by transferring our currency, the Deutsche Mark, into the euro. In sum, ladies and gentlemen, we partly gave up national sovereignty, but we gained way more political and economic power for that. Or look at another alliance. In NATO, we engaged in collective defense of 28 transatlantic partners. NATO is the strongest political and military alliance ever, but NATO is also the daily experience of solidarity. The security concerns of each single partner counts, period. I give you an example. We Germans are doing the air policing for the Baltic states at their borders with Eurofighters, together with many other NATO nations. The same goes for the maritime patrolling with our Scandinavian partners, the United States and the Netherlands. For this, we put German ships under Dutch command. A third example, the OSCE. This is another example for security architecture. When the Russian-Ukraine conflict started, we were glad to have the OSCE. It plays an important role in the Russian-Ukraine conflict because it offered the natural room where the European Union, the Ukraine, and Russia are sitting at the same table. Nobody had to be invited. The negotiation table was there since years. And this opened up, in the actual conflict, a room to agree on principles for a solution, the so-called Minsk Agreement. It's not perfect, but it opens a door to move forward to a solution. The OSCE follows the principles of transparency and confidence building. Believe me, it is not easy to open the books, but we know that transparency is the key for trust and confidence. Now, what is the added value of all this for our security? There are 5 key elements. First, we have a structured procedure to offer a constant dialogue on conflict prevention and conflict handling when there is a crisis. Second, we define binding rules, and thus we respect the rule of law. Third, we gain trust through transparency. Fourth, a sustainable security architecture is never, ever against any country. On the contrary, the philosophy is that it is for the benefit of all. Even through the Ukraine crisis, NATO and the European Union always said, we want a future with Russia. Russia is our neighbor. And finally, fifth, strategically spoken, together we are relevant. On our own, we are not. Ladies and gentlemen, these alliances are not always nice to have and not always easy. It's hard work. You have to invest a lot. It's a constant compromise. Sometimes we fight hard about details, but it is worth it. The smaller countries benefit as much as the bigger ones. The decision-making processes require to convince and not to dominate. It forces to argue on the rule of law and not on historic claims. Ladies and gentlemen, in a globalized world, the economic well-being is interlinked, and so is our security. Stability and security in East and Southeast Asia is, first of all, your concern, but it is ours too. We Europeans are ready to share our experiences, and we are ready and willing to learn from yours. As ASEAN is intensifying its focus on security, including its outreach to China, I see the need of closer cooperation between ASEAN and the European Common Defense and Security Policy. The globalized world is more and more one, but it is far from being united. Dialogue and the sharing of expertise across the continents should lead to a world that is united, more stable, and safer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister, for that very precise set of remarks, for reminding us of the security advantages that derive from the pooling of sovereignty, and also for pointing out how inclusive regional security architecture naturally helps conflict resolution when conflicts arrive. We've had positive, no-nonsense, and precise statements from the podium. We have a good half an hour for debate and discussion. May I remind you all that those who seek the floor should put their delegate badge with the chip facing them in the microphone set and press the button. When your microphone turns green, that means you are in my list. It doesn't mean your microphone is on. I shall turn it on when I call on you. And we have about 7 or 8 requests for the floor already. I will turn to that number and then come back in due course to the panelists for their remarks. Could I please, from France, first call on Philippe Herrera.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to congratulate the 3 panelists for remarkable presentations. I have a very quick comment and question directed more particularly to Admiral Sun. Admiral, France is not a claimant in the South China Sea, but France does have a major stake in developments there. First, of course, as a member of the international community with a stake and respect for international law, but also, and what Minister von der Leyen stated is, I think, very important, as a European country whose prosperity is directly linked to freedom of navigation, not just as an abstract legal principle, but also as a practical reality. And finally, as a country with permanent military bases in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, whose ships and aircraft will continue to fly and to sail freely everywhere that international law allows them to do so, in order to fulfill our responsibilities to contribute to security in the Asia-Pacific region and to work with partners in the region. And that is why, for example, after our naval task force, which made a port call in Shanghai, continued sailing, it sailed through the Paracels in the Spratlys these last few days, actually, fully exercising its freedom of navigation as international law allows it to do so, and will continue to do so. And I think that the statement by foreign ministers of the G7 in Lübeck, Germany, where they expressed their concern at unilateral actions which change the status quo and increase tensions in the East and South China Seas is an important statement. A quick question. Apart from the maritime domain, another key commons for our security and prosperity is the cyber domain. And in the white paper, which China released just this week, it is said, and I quote, that as cyberspace weighs more in military security, China will expedite the development of a cyber force. And I was wondering, Admiral, whether you could tell us a little more about this force and how it fits into the view of interdependence and cooperation that you very eloquently outlined. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Christopher Nelson.
Thank you very much, John. If catastrophe is to be avoided in South China Sea this year, this conference will come to be seen as a very critical player in the role, so thank you for that. Admiral Sun, thank you for a very comprehensive statement, in many ways, I think, reassuring to us as a reminder of the very many ways that China is involved. During your speech, I was particularly struck by your comment that the goal is peaceful cooperation, sustainable security, and building a security road for all, especially in the South China Sea. So in that regard, let me ask you a question with 2 parts. Secretary Carter yesterday, in his very well-received speech, made 2 very specific suggestions. One, that for maintaining peace and stability in the sea, it would be very good if the land reclamation activities by all parties came to a halt. But more importantly, perhaps, it's very important that those existing facilities and those that are being built not be militarized, especially with power projection weapons. So my question to you, sir, is China prepared to work with the Vietnam and the Philippines in particular on a confidence-building measure of a moratorium on continued landfill? And more importantly from that, given your stated goals of peaceful development and safeguarding fishermen and people on those facilities, is China prepared to commit not to station offensive power projection weapons on those islands? So, 谢谢.
Thank you. And from Japan, Dr. Tsuyuki Aoi.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. I have a very quick comment to Dr. van der Leyen, and I do have 3 questions for Admiral Sun Jianguo.
Well, you might have
China.
1 question for Admiral Sun.
Okay, I will limit myself to 1 then. My comment for the German defense minister is I just would like to express my thanks for sharing with us your experience inside Europe, particularly with reference to everyday particular operations which deepened cooperation within Europe, as well as the historical issues. My question for the Admiral is, does China have any policy or particular approach towards protection of civilians mandate in the UN context, which has had recent applications in Darfur, places like Darfur, Ivory Coast, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And from the U.S., Dr. Harry Harding.
Thank you, Chairman. I also have a question for Admiral Sun. Admiral, I was very impressed by your pointing out that some outdated ways of thinking need to be changed. You mentioned ways of thinking that were associated with the era of colonial expansion and also with the Cold War. My question is whether there are still ways of thinking associated with the concept of a century of humiliation that also need to be reconsidered. So specifically, my question would be, do you agree with former President Jiang Zemin, who in a speech many years ago now at Party Day celebrations declared that the century of humiliation was over? Or do you believe that there are still issues, still legacies of the past that need to be overcome before China can believe that the century of humiliation is over? And if so, what those legacies and issues are?
Thank you. From France, François Hesbourg.
Thank you very much, and my question will be to Admiral Sun as well. First of all, thank you, sir, for a clear, positive and broad-ranging presentation. I think it's fair to say that China is widely seen by its foreign partners as conducting an inclusive, constructive and prudent policy in terms of its posture as a global power, notably through some of the initiatives you mentioned, the New Silk Road, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, etc. But conversely, China's policies and actions in the South China Sea are widely seen by many of the same partners as being the polar opposite of this global policy, exclusive rather than inclusive, weakening mutual trust rather than reinforcing it, zero-sum rather than win-win. Now, how do you explain the contrast between these divergent perceptions of China's policies by many of its foreign partners and not simply by the United States of America?
Thank you. Dr. Chungmin Lee.
I have one question to Admiral Sun. You mentioned win-win for China strategy, yet you had no mention of North Korea. And as you know, recently they test-fired SLBMs. What is China's position on North Korea's SLBM capabilities? And to Minister von der Leyen from Germany, we want a strong NATO in Asia because a strong NATO is good for the world and for Asian security. But we're worried that your defense spending is not meeting the 2% level. So with all due respect, Madam, how do you foresee NATO's defense spending in a period of austerity? Thank you.
From China, Major General Gong.
I would like to thank all the speakers, Admiral Sun, and to defense ministers for their very excellent speeches with very positive and constructive messages. Now, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the victory of the Second World War, anti-fascist war. And after 70 years, the issue of history still mars the relations between Japan and its neighbors. And the maintenance of international order after the Second World War is challenged. I think Dr. Yu have mentioned that Germany has never forgotten the past history. So in this regard, I believe Germany has done very beautifully on this issue, which contributes to the better relations among the European countries. So I would like to ask you, what would you like to suggest or advise for the countries concerned in this region in this respect, and in order to maintain or strengthen the regional order? Thank you very much.
Bonnie Glaser.
Thank you, John. I have a question for Admiral Sun. The United States has expressed concern about challenges to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. And you have stated quite clearly that China's presence in the South China Sea, its operations, its construction, is not challenging freedom of navigation. Well, it seems to me that there are several of these land features, for example, Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, which are located within the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. They used to be submerged reefs called low tide elevations under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And yet when US aircraft flew near these land features a week ago or so, China said that these aircraft were entering China's military alert zone. That's not a phrase that I think is very clear under international law. I don't think militaries use it. So I'm wondering if you can explain why you insist that China is not challenging freedom of navigation. And when can China clarify its claim, its dashed line claim in the South China Sea, the ambiguity of which is seen as one of the sources of tension in the South China Sea? Thank you.
And from India, P.S. Surayanarana.
Thank you, Chairman. This is addressed to Admiral Sun. Sir, could you confirm whether China is trying to create an alternative route for Strait of Malacca? And if so, what is the objective? And secondly, what is China's response or reaction to the American-Indian coordinated move to provide security in the Indian Ocean region as well as South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the IISS, Hervé Lemayeux.
Thank you, John. And thank you for the three excellent speeches. My question, we've spoken considerably about maritime territorial issues. I want to raise the attention of the speakers, and particularly Admiral Sun, conflict resolution in mainland Southeast Asia, and particularly on the 2,000-kilometer border that China shares with Myanmar. It seems as if there have been recent allegations that ethnic armed groups, the Wa and the Kokang, are being financed from within Yunnan province. Could he address those allegations? And what, if any, consequences will there be on the comprehensive strategic partnership with Myanmar, and how does this reflect on China's periphery diplomacy with Southeast Asia? Thank you.
Josh Rogan.
Thank you. Thank you. Testing. Testing.
Sorry,
Microphone.
yeah, I'll come back to you, Josh. We'll go to Hideshi Tokuchi.
Well, Dr. Chipman, thank you very much for calling me. Japan also upholds rules-based international order established during these 70 years. And Japan is against any attempt to try to alter the status quo by force. And on this basis, my question goes to Admiral Sun. It seems to me that you are trying to say that China would uphold the freedom of navigation on the high seas, including in the South China Sea. However, there is a strong concern in this part of the world that China would sooner or later declare its air defense identification zone over the South China Sea, utilizing the Chinese construction on the South China Sea. And in my understanding, the Chinese spokesman does not rule out that possibility. And also there is a speculation in this part of the world that the aid is that China would declare would be very similar to the aegis that China illegitimately declared over the East China Sea around 2 years ago, which imposed unilateral obligations to foreign aircraft flying in the aegis. So how do you respond to these speculations? Thank you.
Josh Rubin, your mic's on now.
Thank you very much. Admiral Sun, you've said today that China's policy is to pursue win-win cooperation. In the example of the South China Sea, it seems that Chinese actions are pushing smaller nations to coalesce and against China's policies and to seek U.S. assistance to push back against Chinese actions. My question is, if the South China Sea policy is an example of win-win cooperation, with whom are you cooperating? And who else besides China is winning?
And from the UK, Michael McClay.
Thank you, John. This is a question to Admiral Sun, but it is not necessarily about the South China Sea. I want to ask about the Maritime Silk Road and the Belt and Road campaign, plan, project that we've heard about from Admiral Sun and from many other Chinese speakers. This harks back to a historical age when China was, of course, a greater regional and international power than it's been for the last 100 years. I'm sure the intentions are not hegemonic, but could he explain a little how this maritime vision sits with freedom of the seas and how the win-win approach applies to the many countries that fit into that old historical pattern? And secondly, to Minister von der Leyen and her inspiringly European speech, I just wonder what it is you're looking for in terms of cooperation between the EU and ASEAN. Are there lessons for ASEAN to learn from the way our CFSP has developed over the years? Do you foresee a more active role for Europe in this part of the world? Thank you.
Thank you. And from the IISS, Dr. Nick Redmond.
Thank you. It's a question for Mr. Brownlee, please. So as Dr. Chipman said in his opening remarks, New Zealand has a special role within the South Pacific. Now, when one looks at the transnational threats that are posed to the region, I wonder, do you see the serious scope for capacity building as part of the solution? Or is it a region where really the gains of the most logical solution is always going to be quite a high level of external coverage of security there? And does this assessment vary according to the threat that you're talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take one more question, and then I'll return to the panel. I know there's about 12 others on the list. I see your names. I owe you for perhaps the next session, but I'll conclude with Reinhard Bütikofer of the European Union.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to address a question to Admiral Sun. Other than I believe all the other speakers over this weekend, Admiral Sun, you have omitted the phrase rule of law in your presentation. Could you explain why and maybe comment on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, an important principle of international law is proportionality. So in respecting the principle of proportionality, I want to give 2 minutes to Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, 2 minutes to Gerry Brownlee, and 10 minutes to Admiral Sun to answer the questions that have been put to them. May I ask Dr. Ursula von der Leyen to begin?
Thank you, John. For the 2 minutes, I'm going to start with the answer for the 2% defense spending. Yes, you're right. In the recent years, we've seen in Europe a sharp decline in defense budgets, namely when the economic crisis hit. But there are good news because at the moment being in Germany, we managed the turnaround. No more decline, but a rise in the budget, 8 billion over the next 4 years. We have a problem, a so-called problem. The problem is an even steeper rise of GDP. And I think this is a problem many countries would wish to have, but it is a problem because you see the relation between the GDP and the rise in the defense budget is the 2% that we aim at. We should not look at the opposite, which might be the thought you just have to shrink your GDP as fast as possible, then you cannot cut that fast your defense budget and you'll meet the 2%. No, we want to go the other way around, and it's good to have a sound basis which is a strong GDP. There was a second question, what can be learned from our position within Europe and the leadership we are exerting? Well, I told you about our history and our positive experiences of alliances, and therefore we decided to stick strongly to leading from the center, which is take on responsibility, yes, be reliable, but always analyze, always decide, and always act with your partners. The outcome is better. Sometimes we're slower, yes, but the outcome is better because you have diverse views on the problems, the risks, or the opportunities, and you have diverse approaches that you put in a common concept then. You know from the business sector, the more homogeneous the leading group is, the higher the risks and the less opportunities are taken. The other way around is true too. The more diverse the board is, the more risks are avoided and the more opportunities are seen and taken. And that's the same approach leading from the center that Germany pursues. Third question was the cooperation between the European Union and ASEAN. Well, it's about aiming at an increase in prosperity. That's what our people expect us to achieve. And we all know that prosperity is embedded in security. Therefore, the exchange between our two, the European Union and ASEAN, about the analysis of the threats we're seeing, and I'm not only talking about projection of power and territorial claims, but let us look at piracy, at the phenomenon of foreign fighters, at the moment the refugees at the Mediterranean Sea and in the Rohingyas. We see that we have many, many phenomena in common where we can share the expertise and the approach we are taking to solve the problems. All of that with the goal to raise prosperity, stability, and security. Thank you.
Dr. van der Leyen, thank you very much indeed. Gerry Brownlee.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John. Prior to your unilateral declaration of panel proportionality, I thought I had enormous star power with such a big audience. But can I just say, in relation to the question we've been asked, that I don't think capacity building